Lecture room.
Welcome, everyone, to Executive Function for Leaders. My name is David Berg. I am a business intelligence developer with SMPH, and I am moderating today's session, which will be presented by the one, the only Philip Dahl.
Philip bows.
We'll have some time at the end for Q&A, so if you are joining us virtually, place your questions in the chat, and I'll read them to our presenter. If you are joining us in person, please use the microphone. I'll be running around with it so that the virtual attendees can clearly hear you. So a little bit about our presenter, Philip, today. Philip is a business relationship manager with the Department of Pediatrics at UW's Madison's SMPH. And beyond his work helping to make connections, Philip has a love for musical theater, with Little Shop of Horrors being a top tier choice. So with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Philip.
David leaves front.
I have to figure out how you remembered that fact.
Philip speaks at podium beside screen.
Anyway, I am Philip Dahl. Nice to meet everybody. And this is Executive Function for Leaders. We're going to be taking a look at executive function and really how it applies specifically to leaders and people progressing in their career.
Gestures off screen.
That is me. Sorry, I just had to do that. It was fun. I've been playing with PowerPoint. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk about what is executive function, having a basic understanding of what that is, why it matters, specifically who might experience executive function disorders or just issues, how executive function might evolve for you personally over your career, and then also some ways to improve your executive function for both yourself and also your teams and those around you. So starting with this. Ooh, the audio didn't play. Anyway, that was Hank Hill telling you what is executive function. So very simply, executive function is essentially the concept, the parts of your brain that act as the control center, not the heartbeat, not the breathing, but the cognitive things you decide to do on a daily basis. Those are all tied back into executive function. Daily to plan, focus, remember instructions, and juggle things simultaneously. That's the definition. The definition is the complex invisible mental process that stops you from ordering a third pizza at 3 a.m. while simultaneously remembering you need to file your taxes tomorrow. It really handles all of those things. Control, but then also what you should be doing. It's a little more detail here. So it's goal-directed behavior. You can take a goal, something in the future, maybe extrapolate it out a little bit, and then decide what steps you need to take proactively to get there. Adults, modern world, we do this all the time. For many people, it can seem that's just how we live our life. We have a goal, we figure out what we have to do to meet it. Okay, so why is it important? Some of you may have heard of executive function, some may haven't. The context in which you heard of it may make it odd that we'd be talking about this at a leadership conference. Shouldn't most people in this room have pretty good executive function skills by this point? And that's a very good question.
Slide. Does it apply to my role?
Well, does it apply to your role? Well, I guarantee you it does. And it also applies to your life. So for yourself or your personal career, it's going to impact pretty much everything about it, the decisions you make, the work you do, the quality of your work. It's going to affect your family life, particularly your children as they are developing executive function skills. And then hopefully we'll get there. You'll be able to flip feedback cycles. If you can control your executive function, particularly those in the inhibition control, we can look to take what might have been a negative feedback loop where something you do causes a response, which causes you to do something that's caused a response in a negative cycle, and stop that and kind of flip it the other way. So we create a positive cycle in the other direction. And externally, professionally, it's going to help those we manage. Quite frankly, everybody experiences executive function issues occasionally, and being able to speak that language and have some understanding of what your coworkers or people you manage go through is really important to relationships. And the university. We're trying to build a culture at this university, and the more I study executive function, it really is a starting point for individuals who then will collectively come together and build culture. If individually, there's a set of high-performing, high emotionally intelligent people, and they come together, it stands to reason that the culture, the collective culture, will reflect that.
Slide. My why.
So my why did I personally get into this topic? I've had some really increasing challenges over the past 10 years, some of them health related. I'll talk a little bit about those later, but not all of them health related. I was personally diagnosed with ADHD in 2023. Not something I necessarily grew to identify with. I know I'm not an ADHDer, as they say, but it's certainly something that I've had to recognize as something to work through, not just ignore, but actually start understanding kind of my own motivations for things.
Slide. Prefrontal cortex.
So more later, but first we will do some science. So the prefrontal cortex, that is the prefront of the brain that has really all of the most complex parts of it, right? We have our motor skills, creative functions. Right in the front here, that is really where those most complex operations are starting. It's the last part to develop. Also tends to be the first part to start to degrade, honestly, as we age. So that is just something to keep in mind. That is a section of your brain that truly matters for what we're talking about.
An animated brain.
In case you're wondering where it is located.
Side view brain diagram with arrow pointing to frontal cortex region.
There we go. Right there. That's about where it's located.
Slide.
Also known as the brain CEO. It's kind of neat. So you have different sensory. I asked AI to give me career jobs for all the different sections of the brain. What job would they have? I had that idea because I've heard executive function, or the cerebral cortex, is the CEO of your brain. And so that made me think, well, what are the other jobs of the other parts of the brain? And I thought this was kind of a neat little graphic saying what we're talking about. The prefrontal cortex might not do anything, but it directs all the other functions.
Slide. Core components of executive function.
Okay, so the core components of executive function. We have working memory, and that's really, it's slightly different than short-term memory. So short-term memory, you can tell me a phone number, and I can repeat it for a period of time. Eventually, I'm going to forget it. It'll leave my short-term memory. How working memory is different is it's your short-term memory, but specifically how long can you retain and how much can you retain such that you can do something with it, right? So, for example, I'm not the greatest coder in the world. I understand how it works. My short-term memory says, okay, I need a declarative at the top, and I need some things of syntax. But my working memory is not enough to actually do those things, right? I have a good enough short-term memory, but it's not developed to the point in the coding world where I can do it without reference, where I can do it without other guides. So I wouldn't consider those skills part of my working memory, even if I remember, generally speaking, what they're about. Inhibitory control. This is kind of the top level of that, the more emotional, the more hot aspects of executive function. This will be everything from maintaining focus to not blowing up at a coworker, right? How can I control myself? We talked about taking a pause this morning. That is a really good example of somebody exhibiting inhibitory control, is taking that pause. And then cognitive flexibility. Those two things kind of lead up to the ability to be cognitively flexible. If you have a good working memory, you have the knowledge in your head, and you've been controlling your emotions such that you're not looking through tunnel vision, all of a sudden you can open up this cognitive flexibility that allows you to take different inputs and pivot on the fly without getting tilted.
Slide. Understanding working memory.
A little more information on working memory. It's our temporary information storage. It's where we actively process the information in our head. It's kind of like our RAM. That's probably the best way to think of it versus like storage space. And it's really just essential for problem solving. Without this, we are unable to do that. And we're going to go through.
Slide.
Now this one, mastering inhibitory control. This is the angry bird, not the cardinal from Louisiana. That is an angry bird. That's why he's angry. Yeah, so that's impulse management. Back one. Impulse management, emotional regulation, and focus and productivity. You know, those impulse management and emotional regulation, those certainly feel like they go together. I hadn't previous to this really connected the focus and productivity to that emotional regulation. And the more I think about it, and for me personally, my emotions play so much into my ability to focus. We're going to get to that later and why that can be so true. But think about that for yourself. Even if you feel like you have good emotional control, have you over the last 10 years gotten better or worse at sitting and focusing on something? I'd be curious.
Slide. Unlock cognitive flexibility.
And that allows us to unlock all of those things. Allow us to unlock cognitive flexibility. That's adapting to change. That's creative problem solving. That's coming into a meeting with an idea, being presented with challenges on why that may not work, and still being able to flexibly pivot and come up with real solutions in the moment without being disappointed in the lack of approval, or you were just looking for a good job and what you got was less than good feedback. Can you pivot to that instantly and start working with those individuals on the solution that's going to work for everybody?
Slide. A comic strip.
A little comic I made up. This is kind of taking the three things and putting them together, right? So at the start, this individual, who may or may not have been meant to look exactly like me, is doing a presentation. He came prepared, right? Maybe this individual doesn't have the best working memory, but he came very prepared. He used his compensatory strategy and came prepared to the meeting such that everything was in his noggin. Well, the challenge is whether that's a coworker or a supervisor, they didn't like that idea, right? That individual who's red-faced there, they are not exhibiting inhibitory control, whereas the person taking the pause, it looks like, even with the eyes closed, to me that almost indicates they're taking that pause. They are showing that in response to this negative emotion coming out of that individual. And then because they did not get defensive, because they did not shout back at that other person, right? Then it becomes a my way or your way. But without that, this individual comes back with a compromise because they allowed their brain not to fall down that rabbit hole with that individual who was trying to take them there.
The slide of an officer from the Imperial forces in Star Wars with speech bubbles.
Oh, actually, I'm going to skip this part because it's not working in the slides. Anyway, so this is, just so you know, this is the person who was force choked by Darth Vader. He has a boss. Anyway, we're going to skip past this part.
Slide. Executive function disorders and who has them.
I'll make a video for you later. Okay, so this is actually kind of the meat of really what I want to get to. Executive function disorders and who has them. I don't know. Hopefully this isn't uncomfortable. Does anybody in this room feel like at some point in the past they have suffered from an executive function disorder? Tom? I think 6 months ago I would have told you no personally, but I would have been wrong. I didn't recognize things I was going through as executive function disorders. And one of the genesis of this talk is who else might be in that same boat? So as you're listening to these things, I do ask you, like, think back last year, 2 years. Do you connect with anything I'm saying, even if previously you didn't view it that way?
Slide. Understanding executive function disorders.
So to understand who has it, we kind of have to understand the role they play and the impact of dysfunction, right? Why is it a problem if things aren't working? Well, if you can't make decisions and you can't regulate your emotions and you're not very adaptable, that's really not a recipe for success at the UW. We do know that there are disorders, conditions. ADHD is probably the biggest in pop culture, that are associated with executive function disorders, which makes complete sense. That ADHD is an executive function disorder.
Slide. ADHD and autism is executive function disorders.
Looking at a little more detail, so ADHD might have, focus issues, impulsivity, and poor planning. Common strategies that they use, particularly in children, but these work for adults too. For those things is structured routines, time blocking, constant reminders. Maybe you have one employee that they need one extra reminder more so than the other 4 I have. And rather than viewing that as a problem, understanding that is how I'm going to work with that individual. They may need that. And if it's doable, can we provide things like that? Autism is a little different. Almost I don't want to say the opposite, but very different, more rigid in thinking. Very different strategies. So it really depends. The point of comparing ADHD and autism isn't to compare the conditions, more so to compare the strategies that are different. You have to point the strategies to the specific executive function issues that individual might be having.
Slide.
So this is a great quote, and this is something to bang home. Everyone with ADHD has executive function disorders. Not everyone with executive function disorders has ADHD. Is that clear? Like, they're not. They're connected. They're related, but they are not the same thing.
Slide.
Here's a couple examples to bring that home. One of these people, one of these bedrooms, is owned by somebody with a very bad case of ADHD. One of them is owned by somebody just the opposite. They are naturally a very clean and orderly person. This room looks like their brain. Which one of these rooms is the person with ADHD?
2 bedrooms side by side.
I'm curious why you said that.
2 bedrooms appear side by side. The left room features a low green upholstered bed, light wood nightstands, layered neutral bedding, abstract framed art, sheer curtains and a green geometric rug, while the right room shows a dark wood, 4-poster bed cream bedding, classic framed landscape paintings, heavy curtains, a wooden armoire, and a warm textured rug.
This is a completely hypothetical situation. And so if it was real, you might even be right. In this particular situation, my point really is that you can't tell. I mean, Chad might be onto something. I think that's probably what I would look at. Is it a little too perfect, right? And the reason I might look to that is that which one of these people is naturally just disorderly? And which one of these people has spent 10 years developing compensation strategies for the fact that they're not? And so at this point, when this picture is taken, to the outside observer, they both look clean and orderly. It's just how difficult was one person's journey there compared to the other person's. The outcome's not important. The effort to get there is the difference.
Slide.
So yeah, there's invisible challenges. You know, it's not easy to see from the outside. Recognizing those invisible challenges, particularly as a supervisor, if you're able to do that for one of your people, the amount of goodwill that fosters, the amount that person will feel seen, truly, that you recognize something that to most people is probably invisible. And it's not something you notice the first day you meet them. It's something over time, over months.
Slide. Executive function temporary impact.
So temporary impacts. We just talked about people with ADHD, or even those with autism. It's kind of a known thing. They will experience issues every once in a while. But what about the rest of us? When do we experience these types of issues? Emotional trauma.
Text. Temporary disruption. Emotional trauma and significant loss can cause short-term executive function challenges, impacting planning, memory, and organization.
Recognizing that the person you went to work with on Friday may have had something in their life happen. And on Monday, they're not the same person. But you don't know that. You haven't talked to them yet. All you saw was the email they sent. It was a little short, maybe a little terse. Yeah, okay, whatever. Tough Monday morning. A couple days later, you're in a meeting. That same individual. Again, last Friday, you were just chatting. You're having a great time. You said something at a meeting and they attacked you for no reason. It's like, whoa, okay, I guess something's going on. Could it be that that person had, what happened to them in the meantime, right? Rather than take it on, I must have done something, or to cause them to do something, right? Could it be that they experienced something in their life that is causing them to suffer real impact, real disorder of their executive function due to this trauma, due to this loss? Emotional stress can do the same thing. If you are under stress every day of every week of your job, you are bound to eventually suffer very similar things. The amount of stress creates a trauma over time. and managing everyday tasks just becomes more difficult. But the nice thing about the temporary ones is there almost always is a path to recovery. I mean, they're just temporary by definition. And so, time heals all wounds. To some extent, that's true, but we can't just rely on time. If we just rely on time, what we're losing is productivity. What we're losing is quality time in our relationships. If we let these things fester for too long without just letting time, yeah, that'll fix it eventually, maybe. But if we proactively address it and talk about it and use similar words, hey, this was a challenge for me because, then we can start that healing process and getting back our executive function even sooner.
Slide.
So two quick stories on this topic. Two brothers in snow removal, kind of an analogy. I'm a shovel person. I like to shovel. I don't exercise that much. I always feel like that's how I can get some exercise. My brother, he's a snowblower guy through and through. He hasn't picked up a shovel in 15 years as far as I know. It's snowblower or nothing. And we don't live far from each other. And it snowed a couple weeks ago, right? His snowblower broke. And so both of us were shoveling that day. And he texted me in the middle of it. He says, "This is the worst." He used different words than that. But this is the worst. And I'm thinking to myself, we're doing the same thing. Why is this not bothering me? In fact, I'm enjoying myself. I'm out with my neighbors. We're shoveling. It's specifically because my snowblower broke 10 years ago, and I never got it replaced. Right? I dealt with those challenges. I dealt with the challenge of doing it the harder way of doing it myself. The end result, both our driveways were clear. But my way was harder until his thing broke. And now all of a sudden in the same situation, which one of us is better off? Right? I've developed strategies. I've developed a back that can lift 20 pounds of snow. He was using a snowblower. And so it was that moment, not that losing a snowblower is trauma, but in that moment of trauma, the difficulty on the person that was not experiencing those challenges before is going to be greater if they haven't developed the strategies. One other quick story, and this is just more to bring home the reality of the situation. And this person is now retired, so I don't mind sharing the story. It's over 10 years ago, but this was a support staff I worked with for a long time. And she was, I think, 54 when this happened. And her husband passed away. And it was probably over a year before working with this person was the same. And by the same, I mean productive. Because the quiet moments, right? It wasn't the meetings that were the issue. It was the quiet moments when work was going to get done. And how you focus by yourself when all you can think about is something like that. If you've ever gone through even a loss of a spouse, parent, divorce, anything like that, right? Those big, big, big ones. That's kind of what I mean. And what that does, this is one of the few disorders, few diseases I can think of where somebody without a condition, they don't have ADHD, they don't have autism, anything like that, they can temporarily experience what it's like to live in that person's shoes and experience those challenges, but only temporarily, right? I think that's a really unique thing about this. And so if you're ever working with or dealing with somebody who has a more permanent version of executive function disorder, and maybe you're frustrated, think back to a time or two when you had a temporary executive function issue due to whatever it happened to be. Can you connect those dots to create some empathy?
Slide. Life stuff. Please share any experiences.
Where are we on time? Okay, maybe I'll tell you, if we have some time, we'll do some life stuff.
Slide. Improving executive function.
So again, that part, just to clear, that really was the point. Communicating that executive function issues aren't limited to people with specific conditions. They do affect all of us. And how we discuss them and how we are open and normalize to talk about them, I think is really the benefit that I'm hoping to bring here.
Slide. A table.
Okay, so looking at ways to improve our executive function, taking out working memory. So this left column is the skill we're talking about. Right column is maybe what we're going to improve with it. Pretty simple stuff for the most part. If you want to work in your memory, play memory games. If you want to do better at planning and organization, sometimes that is writing more down, right? Being more stick to your calendar, right? Make sure everything's in there. Emotional regulation. I think we talked about that this morning. Mindfulness and breathing exercises, I think, is exactly what we did. Flexible thinking. This one's interesting. I was connecting. How do we do that at work? Scenario planning. I think that really is the right answer, right? How, like, sitting down, the what if scenarios, not just like break fix, but like, let's think through a multi-step scenario. Let's kind of almost like a tabletop exercise, like you would do with cybersecurity. The big one that was it last winter, spring? There was a lot of scenario planning, a lot of like high level thinking going on in that room that day. I thought it was a really great exercise. And then self-monitoring, journaling, that's a big one. Personally, I find that difficult. The time tends to be the issue for me. So for me, feedback loops, right? It's less self, but having a trusted person, whether it's your supervisor or a trusted colleague that can really give you that feedback on a regular basis, not just when something's a problem, but hey, we meet every 2 weeks, give a little feedback on each other, and what have you heard about me? What have I heard about you? That can be a way to if somebody like me, where task initiation can be a problem, journaling is an issue. Plain and simple. What can we do other than journaling? And for me, it's talking.
A new table with 3 columns.
So let's scoot those over to the left. Let's bring in the team and direct reports. What can a team or a supervisor do with their team to improve the level of executive function amongst their whole team? Working memory is interesting. So yeah, you can play games. Documentation writing. Does one person on your team write all the documentation? If they do, consider letting somebody else write it, even if just an exercise. Sometimes writing the steps down rather than just reading them is a way to further cement something in your mind. Planning and organization. The Agile Scrum methodology, the more I've been introduced to it, witnessed a few teams using it, it's like that would really help somebody that has issues with these really large multi-stage projects. Because what is Agile? You break it down into chunks and sprints, right? You're eating the elephant one piece at a time, to borrow a phrase. Emotional regulation, that's, the same thing, mindfulness and breathing. I would add to that talking. Flexible thinking, asking people's opinion, disaster recovery drills, tabletop exercises, and self-monitoring. Again, going to that feedback loop, thoughtful performance reviews. Can we use performance reviews as thoughtfully as possible?
Slide and sleep. Image. 4 animated puppies sleep together.
And sleep. This is the biggest do as I say, not as I do thing I could possibly say. We all know this, right? Sleep. Our resilience is higher. Our patience is better. Everything all tied back to those executive function skills. It's tied to sleep in so many ways.
Slide. How executive function evolves. Okay,
how does it evolve? So a child, they have very basic executive function skills they're developing. I'm not going to have a cookie for every meal, right? By adults, we're past that. We're mostly not having cookies. But how does it actually change in the workplace?
Slide.
So I'm going to kind of go through like a doer, manager, leader and see how they're different. So what are the responsibilities and focus of a doer, right? They're going to deliver results, manage their own workload, and they're building expertise. Their success is really about their personal output and reliability.
Slide.
So their critical executive functions that we're connecting to those would be working memory, focus control, and planning and organization, right? Planning and organization for a doer may look different than a leader, but it's still planning and organization. It's just kind of the level at which you're doing it of complexity.
Slide.
Now, manager, right? You're gonna set goals. You're coordinating other people's work, and you're working on developing people, right? Their success is team performance and stability.
Slide.
So for them, planning, again, planning, but they're going to set timelines, prioritization for team members. This is kind of where the first step where cognitive flexibility really comes up when you're dealing with different people, different issues at the same time, and balancing your team's priorities. But then the biggest one, I'd say the biggest challenge for most new managers is that emotional regulation. Before the first time you're a manager, you're really focused on self. Once you're a manager, your emotional regulation really is tied to other people, right? And their view, their emotions are tied to how you're presenting yourself.
Slide. Leader, responsibilities and focus.
Now, leader, they're looking at creating visions, right? They're inspiring, and they're navigating very complex paths.
Slide.
Now, their success is the direction alignment and the overall impact of the whole organization. So their executive function skills, and these are some we've definitely heard about, strategic thinking, right? That is the top level of that planning executive function. Systems flexibility, not just flexible in my own work, but I can see the flexibility in all these systems around me. And then emotional intelligence is really, that's the final boss of what we talked about this morning with Mark. All of these skills culminating in that form of emotional intelligence.
Slide. A table.
Pretty much what I said before. I was just going to kind of skip through here. I made some handouts if anybody would like them. And I made a worksheet. If anybody's curious to try this for themselves.
Slide.
It's framed slightly different than before. It's focusing on, here's some executive function skills and how would a doer, a manager, and a leader utilize those particular skills in your job. So maybe pick one that you are and write down the different things that you might do that use those core skills.
Slide.
And again, this is the takeaway here is we're stacking skills. We're not going from doer and we're forgetting those skills because I'm a manager. I'm going to have a whole new set of executive function skills. No. They build on each other very much so. You can't get to this emotional intelligence unless you have focus control, unless you have emotional regulation, right? So think of it as stacking more so than letting go. And in the same way, Aaron Rodgers still has to practice his throwing motion, right? Us as leaders still should go back to those basic focus exercises, those emotional regulation exercises to make sure that our foundation is still as strong as it was when we, 10, 20 years ago, depending on how long you've been where you're at.
Slide. Conclusion.
So conclusion, back to the why.
Slide. Lessons learned.
Executive function, it underpins all of our daily activities. And understanding it encourages leaders not only to not be complacent, but it encourages their team, right? As a leader, if you put emphasis on these skills and you put importance on this and making sure you demonstrate them, the impact on your team dynamics and decision-making is going to be immense.
Slide. Lessons learned. An image of a puppy in a graduation cap, a noun.
It's also about helping others, and that's really key. These are tough times at the university. People have personal stuff, but we also have the things going on in the public sector, in the country, and all of those things add up, and everybody's breaking point is different. So if you notice somebody that's suffering from some kind of trauma or just maybe isn't themselves, maybe they didn't go out last night, maybe they didn't do something right, maybe it is a fundamental issue they've started to have with whether it's their emotions or just keeping track of everything going on in their lives. Can we give each other the grace to have these moments and still hold each other accountable for the work we're doing?
Slide. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Nick, you have a question?
Observing yourself is hard. If you don't have a professional or somebody trained in it, are there strategies or tools you know of for finding out what parts of executive function are strengths and where you could stand to work on it?
Yeah, that's a good point. One thing we didn't have time for, and I'm going to get there, is a lot of the resources. Like let's say you want an assessment. I'm going to take an assessment and determine which skills am I strong in and which ones am I weaker in. A lot of those are developed by educators, people in the schools. And so I wasn't exactly sure how to present something like that looks like it might be intended for a middle schooler. But when I look at the content of it, If I didn't know it was from middle school, I wouldn't know. So to some extent, I wonder, and this is a question, do we have the community of ADHD and autism, the clinicians that do that work, do we have them to thank for being able to utilize some of their work to make our executive function skills better, even if that wasn't the original intention? And so to answer your question, yes, there are resources available, I can grab some for you, that essentially assess, they're mostly clinical. It's not quite like a 360 review, right? That's more like person getting feedback from others. That would be another suggestion. If there's any 360 reviews that could go on, because a lot of those things, you could tie a lot of those 360 reviews to various executive function skills. So yeah, both kind of a clinical assessment and then more like a peer review would be two different ways that I could give you like a, here, this is maybe what we think you should work on.
We have time for one more question, if anyone has one.
Yeah, Phil, thank you for kind of the vulnerability and the sharing here and everything like that. Your ADHD diagnosis was relatively recent. I'm wondering what have been helpful steps to take to kind of improve your executive function. What have you done that's been really helpful?
Sure. It's funny. Actually, I started doing those things before they gave me the diagnosis. That's like starting to recognize through changes I was making, and it was through the MORE program, right? That was a big year for me, big changes, and that created a lot of questions. In like, I'm seeing all these other people doing things a certain way. It feels a little different for me, right? MORE gave me all these strategies to be a better leader. Ultimately, they were the same strategies I would use to deal with ADHD. It's hilarious. It's the same thing. And it's funny. I was so proud of all that work I did. And I'll just never forget this moment. The first time I ever took medicine for ADHD. And I was like, could I have just done this instead of that whole year of MORE? Because it feels kind of the same. Like, I mean, the changes, like there are chemical changes that happen. Like that is not to be dismissed. It's not all behavioral. There are absolutely brain chemistry things at play here. And so that's why we can't, judging and assuming we can't do with anybody. Like that's just, all we can do is observe and work with what is presented to us. So to answer your question, in that way, the strategies that I was using was go through the MORE book. I'm not even, it is that. It's the, we talked about emotional intelligence. We talked about how you present. These are all very tied to inhibitory control, right? It doesn't matter how I'm feeling that day. I'm going to present like I want to be here. That is a form. Actually, Lois Brooks at IT Pros. Remember, she gave a story on when something doesn't go well, right? What does she say she does? She takes 24 hours, she feels her feels, and then she moves on, right? That was, as I was thinking about this talk, I remembered that. I was like, that is an example of her specifically using, whether you call it the pause or whether you call it, an executive function, emotional control. That is a strategy that she used to deal with those really difficult things to deal with, right? She gave herself a deadline to be done with the moping. And that is another strategy. So things you hear, things people do, it's easy to connect back to these skills once you start that conversation. I think I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Phil. Thank you for those online who joined us. And we look forward to hearing back from you and for the rest of the sessions today.